Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and I'm here with my main man, Caleb of Antioch. Um, Caleb J. Mullins, the great, the legend. Um,
Hoping to
and,
be.
and today we are going to be talking about monsters. So you can see I'm wearing my favorite monster. Oh, my camera's mirrored. My favorite monster, Godzilla,
There you
here.
go.
But yeah, so we're gonna be talking about monsters, what monsters are, and bonus content. We're gonna be talking about monsters getting redeemed. What does that look like? So, Caleb, why don't you start us off? When we talk about monsters, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and I guess this is an appropriate topic given we're coming up on one of my favorite holidays, Halloween.
Heck
Uh,
you.
so sorry, all you fundamentalist evangelicals.
That's right.
Halloween is awesome, and you should get
Mhm.
with the program. And it's a
That's
very
right.
Christian holiday, more than you
That's
think.
right.
Um, yeah,
Exactly.
maybe we'll have to do a podcast on that at some point. But
Oh, for sure.
yeah, monsters are one of those things that seem to not go away in our minds, in our culture, um, in our imaginations. And despite being on this other end of the Enlightenment, where rationality and scientism seem to dominate, people still have this dread fascination with monsters. And monsters are typically things that, I mean, it's really hard to define what a monster is, really, at the end of the
Hmm.
day. We often call people who are evil, you're a monster, right? Um, or you get, classic like me, and you think of the universal monsters, Dracula,
Right.
the Wolfman, Frankenstein.
Heck yeah.
But the idea of monsters has existed probably since humanity was created, right? It's part of our understanding of the world, and really, in many ways, an understanding of ourselves. And
Hmm.
another thing, kids, there are monsters all over the Bible,
That's right.
all over the Bible. And well, maybe we could jump from there. And so, what monsters are you talking about, Caleb? Well, there are everything from dragons to
Hmm.
giants to satyrs, centaurs. There are sphinxes or lamassu, also called cherubim. There are revenants or shades,
Yeah.
zombie creatures, essentially. There are people who practice dark arts, which I would argue is a type of monster. Witches and sorcerers and things like that. Um,
Right.
so
Here's one of
there,
my favorites. Let's go to one of
what's
my
that?
favorites here.
Yeah.
So Job 41:1. Canst thou draw out the Leviathan with an hook, or
Hmm.
catch his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? And then in verse 10 it says, none is so fierce that dare stir him, and who is able to stand before me? So that's
Yeah.
just right there in the book of Job. We see the Leviathan. Another verse about the Leviathan is Psalm 74. It's talking to
Hmm.
God. It says, you break the head of the Leviathan in pieces, and you give him as meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness.
Yep.
Isaiah 27 says, in that day the Lord, sore and great strong, will punish the Leviathan, that piercing serpent, even the Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So there we had the Leviathan and the sea dragon.
Yep.
And let me
Rahab.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's
Another
the
sea dragon
shades. You made reference to the shades.
from
Shades.
Saul. Yeah.
Yeah.
We say
And
that we mention those in our morning prayers every morning.
yeah,
Uh, do the shades rise up to praise thee? You know,
that's right. Do the shades
yeah.
rise up to praise thee?
Yeah. Do you work
The
much for the dead? Yeah. Those sort of
again in
things.
Job, the shades tremble beneath the waters and the inhabitants thereof. That's Job 26.
Yep.
Um, here's another one. For the how Proverbs 2 verse 18 says, for her house is on the way down to death. Talking about the prostitute, it says, her house is on the way down to death, and her footsteps go down into the shades. Um,
Yeah.
and by the way, I've heard Protestants try to say that that's just talking about like shade under a tree. That's so not what that's talking about.
Not shade, shades.
Shades,
You
exactly.
know,
Shades,
nobody says it's hot. Let's go find some shades. Let's go
right?
find some shade, right? And
Exactly.
if you divorce, the scripture from the context in which it is in the ancient Near East, of course you're going to try to make some rational explanation of this. There's also creatures in the Bible, which I would consider were creatures, werewolf
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you have the incident with King Nebuchadnezzar becoming a madman, and his uh his hair grows out all over his body, and his nails become like talons, and he
Right.
eats grass like an ox, and he can't speak. He just sort of grunts and acts like an animal. We also see Benaiah, one of King David's mighty men, his Gibborim, are his resume is listed right as to what he has done in his life to earn his position as captain of the guard. And one of the things it says he went down and he found a lion in a pit on a snowy day, and he jumped down and killed it with his bare hands. Could have left the lion there, but no, I'm going to kill it, right? And then he kills an Egyptian giant. He takes the giant's own spear and kills him with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kills two, this is very mysterious, lion-like men of Moab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And some people have translated this as being like a warrior cult to one of the gods of the Moabites, which they certainly had lion-headed gods. The
Mm-hmm.
Egyptians certainly had lion-headed gods like
And it
the
could
goddess
be
Sekhmet.
that, but it could
Right.
be that, but here's the thing. Let's say that it is.
Hmm.
Isn't that a monster? Like, how much more of a monster
Yes.
can you get than to be part of some kind of depraved war cult that's going around
Right.
killing people?
Yes.
Like, that's a
Right.
monster.
Exactly. And there, even in the Stone Age, we have carvings from the Neanderthals of
Mm-hmm.
ivory on mammoth tusks of lion-headed men. And there's actually a book series which I'll plug here by Brian Godawa. It's called Chronicles of the Nephilim, and it was based on Michael Heiser's work, the author who wrote the Divine Council, and the Unseen World, all that kind of
The
stuff. Which I
best
can't.
Protestant.
The best Protestant scholar in the last 100 years, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and he gets a lot of crap for it even after he's been dead for almost 2 years, which I think
Yep.
is a shame. Particularly looking at you, Jordan Cooper, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll call him out. I'm
Well,
not afraid.
the thing is, Jordan Cooper has to give uh Heiser crap because the problem is that Dr. Michael Heiser pretty much makes it impossible for lots of intellectually honest people to stay Protestant. You just can't
Right,
maintain, and it's not just, I realize that Michael Heiser got some stuff really radically wrong, like
right,
the sacraments and stuff. He's a Protestant. He's going to act like a Protestant. But at
sure.
the end of the day, um, the reason why Jordan Cooper has such a bone to pick with this guy is because Michael Heiser makes it very impossible for you to see things like justification as this
Original
forensic
sin. Yeah, he didn't believe in
legal
original sin
garbage.
either. Yeah,
Right. And he
yeah.
shows that original sin doesn't make sense in the context that
Of an
scripture was
ancient Near
given it.
Eastern world too. Yeah,
Right.
and
So that's why
right.
they hate Heiser.
And Heiser creates a bridge to orthodoxy. I mean, you're looking at
Exactly.
someone who got to orthodoxy primarily through Heiser's work. And so,
He was
the other thing.
teaching at Liberty when I was going there.
Oh, really? Yeah, I knew he was a
Yeah.
Liberty teacher, but yeah. And so, and of course, he's done a lot of work on monsters as well.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the lion-like men of Moab, uh, I'm like, in the book, The Chronicles of the Nephilim, the lion-like men of Moab are presented as these men in a warrior cult, and the guys who are in the highest rank have modified their bodies to look like lions.
Oh,
So
wow.
they've got tattoos that look like ritual stuff all over them. They have gloves that have uh, iron claws and bronze claws on them, so they look like they have lion paws. Their teeth have been chiseled to look like fangs, and they grow their hair out long and have it styled to look like a mane. Their
Yeah,
nose has been cut to look more like a cat's nose. So, and a lot of people would look at that. Well, that's just a human who's messed his body up. I'm like, that's still a monster.
right,
That is to see, people want monsters to be totally physical beings. They want things like Bigfoot to be an ape. They want dragons to be dinosaurs, etc., like that. But the fact of the matter is that monsters are always spiritual in nature to one extent or the other. And I'm not denying that they don't have a physical manifestation. Of course they do. We
right.
believe that as Orthodox Christians. I mean, St.
I mean, our
George,
book would kind of suck if they didn't have a physical
that's true.
manifestation.
That's true. And we believe saints like St. George killed a
That's right.
dragon. We
Mm-hmm.
believe that St. Philip exorcised the dragon that was in the temple at the Oracle of Delphi. You know, we have all these stories of saints encountering Daniel. Daniel killed the King Cyrus's
That's
dragon,
right.
who was the pet of Marduk, right? And it's amazing, you know. So monsters, do have both a spiritual and a material reality, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that monsters are purely physical beings that can be overcome by force of arms
Right.
or with a gun or something like that.
Or a silver
And
bullet.
or a silver bullet, and there's even spiritual connotation to that, which we can talk about. But at the end of the day, monsters are something which doesn't make sense of our reality. They're this other, right? They're a category all their own. So we have animals which we are familiar with, a crocodile, lion, whatever, which can be terrifying in and of themselves, but they're an
Mm-hmm.
animal at the end of the day. We can understand an animal. We can understand an animal kills because it's hungry, right?
Right.
And we can understand we can kill and trap animals, right? And overcome them, right? We can understand people, when we talked about in our last podcast about the Assyrians who slaughtered millions of people, and then called it, peace or conquest or whatever.
Right.
We can understand human beings doing something like that. But when you have something that doesn't look quite like an animal and then also has human qualities as
Right.
well, and is often a blending of multiple animals, multiple human traits all into one, that's when things start to get weird. And this is why you see, for example, in ancient maps and even maps going up into the early modern period, such as with Christopher Columbus, on the edges of the map where places were unknown, they drew sea dragons.
Right.
And that sounds really weird to us, but the idea is that in the unknown margins of the world, monsters reside there. You get this same pattern in Western iconography of churches. You get gargoyles
Mm-hmm.
that are carved on the outside of the churches and made into gutter spouts for rain. And many people wondered, like, why are holy places decorated with demons? And the idea is that you don't find these gargoyles in the churches. You
Right.
find them outside, right? And the idea is that inside is the ark of safety, and outside is all the horrid things of the world. And this,
Exactly.
of course, harkens back to Noah's flood, because one of the chief reasons the flood is sent, the Bible mentions, of course, the violence and just the evil that had grown in the heart of mankind, but also the incursion caused by Azazel and Samyaza, the fallen angels
Right.
who created the giants, some of the first monsters, right?
Exactly. Genesis 6.
Right, and so they're outside the ark and get drowned, and the safety is inside Christ's holy church, the true ark, right?
Exactly.
And that, of course, is a foreshadowing and a warning of what is to come. When Christ comes, Christ loves the analogy of Noah's flood. He mentions that people will be rejoicing and people will be giving in marriage, and then I will come, right?
Right.
And it's so amazing how that connects to the ark and the whole idea of margins. And what we see with society is, we see that the thieves and the brigands and the people who don't belong in a society are, quote, marginalized. They're put
Right.
outside of good company. And so it seems like one of the ways God redeems that idea, and this will tie back into the redemption of monsters, is that he puts them outside of society to define the inside of society. So Jonathan Pajot has a great video on this. I'm not doing it justice, but where he
Right.
talks about darkness and light, right? That the margins are dark, yes, but you need shadow to create a beautiful piece of art, because if you have too much light, it'll be blinding, right?
Right.
And that's certainly where I think we encounter monsters, to be sure. But the way I would define a monster is something that's not man, something that's not animal, and something that is tied directly to the spiritual world in some way or another. It's an amalgamation of all those things into one.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So you mentioned giants, and
Hmm.
I think that a lot of people, and we've talked about this before, and
Hmm.
uh Stephen DeYoung, everybody gets excited when we talk about giants. But what's interesting is that in Genesis 6, you know, a lot of people, here's what I think is interesting. People all note that, across cultures there's a flood myth, right? But
Hmm.
what they don't recognize very often is just how much these flood myths actually have in common. So
Yeah.
Genesis 6 starts out, it says, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful to look upon, and they took for wives any they chose. And then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God and the daughters of man lay together, and they bore children to them. And these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
Right.
So that gives us the background to the flood, but what I'm getting at is that's actually like part of the common myth. This is something that all of these different myths about floods all involve giants or all involve some kind of amalgamation
Yeah.
between man and the gods, or in this case, it says the sons of God. So, what Genesis is talking about is exactly what Caleb was referencing earlier. It's ritual, in this case, ritual creation of giants. And I'm putting that in quotation marks because, well, they were likely large in stature, a lot of them, like Goliath was. Um, you didn't have to be large in stature to be a giant. You were a
Right.
giant based on, it was a description of what you were, not of what you looked like. But we've
Yeah.
talked about all that before. Um,
Right. Because
that
Hercules could be a is a giant,
Yeah,
but
Hercules is a giant.
he's a normal sized man, but
Right,
the fact that he's a giant is his strength. This
exactly.
supernatural strength and behavior, and uh,
Superman is a giant.
right. They'll see demigods are like that, right? A lot of them look like normal people, but then they have these extraordinary superhuman abilities that surpass that of a man. So, you could say Hercules is a giant in strength.
Right,
You often hear people say that he's a mental giant, right?
right,
So,
exactly.
so
We still do this
smarts,
today.
intelligence are another one.
Yeah,
Is another way you could be a giant. The ability to manipulate thousands of people and just have people do what you want.
yeah, Hitler
So it
was a
has,
giant.
yes, it has multiple, applications. But the other thing is that we see the blending of spiritual and physical in a way that had never been done before.
Right,
And you have, for example, the angels, the fallen, who are not to reproduce, right?
right,
God made them immortal where they cannot die, so they have no need to reproduce. They can't be killed in any conventional way we understand killing.
right,
And so what's the need to, and they don't have a gender. That's the other thing. They don't have a biological sex like humans do.
right,
Although every angelic name we see is male,
right.
in Hebrew sense, but they're
And the
not
word
properly
angelos
messenger,
is actually a
right?
Mexican word, which is
Right.
weird because like in Western art, they're always portrayed as female.
And it's funny, my wife, when we were at our prayer corner, actually said, she said, why do Michael and Gabriel, because all the males mostly in
Right,
icons have beards, except the only exception I can really think of is like Saint Stephen, because he was supposed to be a young man when
right,
he was killed. And she's like, why is it that the angels don't have beards? That seems to be kind of off, don't you think? They
right,
said that, and she said they kind of look not quite feminine, but they have some feminine traits. And I
right,
turned around and I said, yes.
right.
and, and
Exactly.
what I, and what I was getting at is that that's supposed to portray they're not human. There's something other. There's something that's above that, and they're not. And they don't have a biological sex, so they have sort of this. Um, and I don't mean this negatively, like an androgynous sort of
Right,
appearance, to kind of communicate to you there's something up with these guys.
right,
But what you have is, and then you have humans who were made to reproduce.
right,
We have sex organs, we have, sexuality and biological genders. And you have these two things coming together and reproducing, which is something that just should not happen.
right.
First, Enoch calls it an abomination
Mm-hmm.
for this to happen. It's never a good thing. And so what they produce are these offspring that are something other, something that should not exist. You have very physical beings that are either very large or at least have abilities that should not belong to a human,
Right,
right? That's something that you find in spirit beings. And this is kind of the precursor for what happens with the flood. And this is my pious opinion, and I've actually had a couple of Orthodox friends who are catechists who share this opinion. And when it talks about Noah was pure in his generation
mm-hmm.
and found favor with God, I don't think that's just pure in the moral sense. I really, in my opinion, I do think he was the last human. Him and his family were the last humans on the planet. I think
Yeah.
that the demonic incursion was so bad and so widespread across the world that they were the last ones left. I really do think that was the case.
I wish
And
I had saved it now because I think not only do I think you're spot on, but I think science is starting to catch up with this
mm,
because I just watched, like I said, I wish I had saved a clip from it so that we could play it here because you would get a kick out of this, but I didn't think of it at the time. But I saw a documentary about um Neanderthals,
yep,
and they were
yep,
talking about like what Neanderthals looked like, what they acted like, how they hunted, how they made
mhm,
war with other humans. And by the way, I'm saying other humans because I don't believe the mythology of evolution that says that we were different species. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. But
right.
my point is that as I'm watching this documentary, I'm going, that sounds a lot like Nephilim, dude. Like these.
I actually and I'll get a lot of crap for this, I'm sure, from the more scientifically minded, but just so you folks know, I do have a degree in anthropology. So I have studied this stuff, and my professor was an ardent secularist. So yes, I have heard it from your high priests in the universities. And I did very well in their classes, just so you know. And but yeah, I do actually share that opinion that I think Neanderthals might have been the first type of Nephilim that were
Mm-hmm.
created. And it's funny because there's a very popular hypothesis out there called Neanderthal predation hypothesis, where it says that basically Neanderthals hunted humans as a regular prey item. And at first, it was sort of laughed by a bunch of atheists and secularist scholars as like, no, we know Neanderthals made clothing. We know that they made
Mm-hmm.
art and instruments. We know they had probably a religion and a belief in the afterlife and all that kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
And
I'll bet they did.
and right, right. And see, now I don't necessarily agree with the part of the hypothesis that says they probably looked more like gorillas and were covered with hair and things. But this idea that they hunted humans and raped women out of
Mm-hmm.
pure pleasure and all that kind of stuff. I think that's accurate because people would get all into that. And it's funny, a recent study showed that they did a study of Neanderthal diets. They were not only eating like mammoths and straight-tusked elephants and
Hmm.
things like that. They ate human beings and they ate each other.
They ate each other. Yeah. They
Yes,
ate
and it
each other.
shocked people that that was a regular part of their diet. And it's funny because in the book of Enoch, or in first Enoch, it says that when the giants ran out of food to eat, they turned on each other. And so
Hmm.
it's like it's like, well, I mean, I'm not trying to, do this hyper literalist sort of reading of Enoch or the scriptures,
Right.
but it's like still it
But the
rings
pattern,
so
it's a
the
pattern.
pattern,
It's a
right, is
pattern.
so true. And
History
so
doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme.
right, and I think that what made them so effective is that Neanderthals probably did look like normal humans in some respects. I mean, obviously they had
Hmm.
the big brow, beetled brow regions and the
Yeah, but
squat,
there are some tribal
barrel-chested
people who
bodies.
look like that even today.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
the
can't totally
Eskimos,
say that that's
the Eskimos and the Inuit actually share a lot of biological traits
right.
with Neanderthal, and so that might have helped them to infiltrate, human
Right.
camps and but I think a lot of the otherness, the fear of things that look like us, the uncanny valley is what it's called.
Yeah.
This is where the guys who work at robotics, they say the more you make a robot look like a human, the more uncomfortable you feel.
Right.
And this also feeds into the monster mythos in the fact that the monsters that terrify us the most are the monsters that look the most human.
That's right.
So vampires, werewolves, zombies, all those kind of things, centaurs, satyrs. If the more human it looks, the more terrifying it is. And I think that has to do with the fact that it's kind
Yeah.
of been inbred into our biology and to our culture that anything that looks human and doesn't act like human, we have an automatic fear of. And I think we're right to
Right.
fear the dark in that
We are.
regard,
We're right to fear.
Um,
Well, we're right to fear these things because and so for those of you who don't know what the uncanny valley is, that term was like Caleb said, it was coined by robotics
mhm,
engineers who basically they said that there's kind of this sweet spot where if you start so there's things like Wally that have some human features but are obviously not human. And so
it's a
we think they're
machine.
cute.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, that's cute. Like it's like a little
A
robot with
toy,
eyes. That's
a
cute. It's a
talking toy.
toy.
Yeah.
Right. It's a talking toy. It's cute. And this happens in video games too. If video games look like kind of like anime characters and have, big, huge eyes and all this,
Crazy
we just,
hair,
right,
swords
crazy
that no
hair.
human should be able to pick
Right,
up.
exactly, like massive sword. We're like,
Like
oh, that's
guts from
cute. It
yeah,
doesn't
Berserk,
unsettle us at all. Right.
No.
It's like, oh, that's cute. It's cool. I like it. Or like the
Yeah.
Ninja Turtles. They're like they're kind of like monsters actually because they're people turtles, but they don't look
Yeah.
human enough to really bother us. So it's like, oh, it's cute.
No.
It's funny.
Hmm.
So you have that, but then as the humanness increases to a point where it gets to a point where, and I don't know if you played like the Call of Duty games from
Yeah. The early Call of Duty games before it
2007 to
was massively
9.
popular. Yeah.
Yeah, Call of Duty, like from 2007 to 2009, they got characters to look very, very human. Like the graphics were so good that if you just looked at these characters, they pretty much looked just like people. But the
Yeah.
problem
CGI is getting
was,
good. Crazy good.
yeah, exactly. But the
Too
problem was
good.
when they started talking and their mouths didn't move right and their interactions didn't look right. They didn't
Yeah.
quite blink often enough. And this is what we see with robots as well, is the same thing that happens with video games. As you make them look almost completely human or completely human, if their behavior doesn't line up to human behavior, or if there's just something off, like I said, their mouth doesn't move the right way, or maybe their hands don't look right. Like with
Mm.
AI, when AI generates these images and the hands don't look right, there's something off about, the eyes are just dead. There's no emotion in them.
Yeah, I was about to say the lack of emotion, the lack of passion or empathy is also another thing it
Exactly.
throws up. It's like
So
they
it's
kill a
just like,
person and their face is just stoic. This is what scared so many people about the Terminator when the
right,
Terminator movie came out.
exactly. And that's why, like Arnold was such a great actor because he was able to
Yeah,
portray that. It's like he was able
yeah,
to bring that to life. But that's what the uncanny valley is. And then the theory is that if you can overcome that hump to the point
hmm
where it now looks and acts perfectly human, we'll be comfortable with it again.
right.
But when you're in that ugly spot where it's like it looks human enough,
hmm
but it also isn't human, then it's unsettling to us. And
Right.
so I share all of that just to say that what Caleb and I are driving at is there's a reason why we feel this way. And it's because there are things that have been almost human. There are creatures that have been through the process of demonic interaction with us, have been almost human. And there are other things as well that are, vampires. And I mean, think about what a
Becoming
vampire
lesser human.
is.
Yeah.
Like a
Demon
vampire
possessed. Yeah.
looks human because it used to be human at one time. But
Werewolf looks like a human during the day.
yeah, during the day, a werewolf looks like a human. Um,
Frankenstein is made of dead human, or the
that's
Frankenstein's
right.
monster, sorry
Yeah,
kids,
that's right.
is
That's
is
right. Let's
made of
get
dead
specific.
human parts, right?
Here's
Sewn
another
together
one.
back
Here's another one. I'm gonna get us in so much trouble, and I'm so sorry.
to life. Okay, okay, do it.
Okay. Here's one that really looked human. Um, so Isaiah 34:14 says, wild animals will meet with hyenas, and the wild goat, by the way, that's actually centaur,
And
shall
Seder
cry
too.
to his, or yeah, satyr, sorry. That's actually
Yeah,
satyr. In the original language, it's actually satyr. Shall cry to his fellow indeed, and there the night bird settles and
Lilitu.
finds herself a resting place. What is the night bird? Well, if I go down to my footnote on my little Bible app here, it says Nightbird, identity uncertain. So you can tell that these are
Really?
Protestant. Yeah, you can tell these are Protestant scholars because
Yeah.
they're uncomfortable with this word. So they're just
Pe-
like
yeah,
identity uncertain. Um,
yeah.
so
People, yeah, affected by modernism and not wanting their
that's right.
religion to look stupid or
Oops,
absurd
don't. Oops, we
or
can't have
not
that.
modernized
We
or
can't have that
irrational.
one.
Yeah, we can't have
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
So the Nightbird is in the original language, it's the Lilitu. Now, what is the Lilitu? It's Lilith. It
Yeah.
is a demonic spirit that looks like a woman but isn't one. And in the ancient
Yeah.
world, they believed that this Lilitu spirit would essentially go about at night stalking. And if you were a pregnant woman and you encountered this uncanny valley woman who looked like a woman but didn't act like one, your baby would die. um
And she
and
was known to drink the blood of
and she
babies
was
too.
known to drink the blood of babies. And so that's one of my
Vampires.
favorites. And I know we're going to get in
Uh,
trouble because here's the thing is there is like Jewish pseudepigraphal type stories
yeah.
where they take that concept and they give this creature an origin story.
Which
And
is yeah.
its origin story is not something
Warped.
that's orthodox.
Warped.
Right.
It's not even apocryphal
Right. It's
for
not even
us.
apocryphal. It's
It's
just
just
like a
heretical,
goofy,
you
yeah,
know.
it's just a heretical, goofy story. Um, but unfortunately, that's the only reference most people have to the word Lilith is this
Yes.
goofy story that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But what we're referring to is there was a kind of demonic entity that may or may not have at some point been human. Because remember, we talked about this before. Humans can
Demonosis.
become
Go see our
demons.
episode before.
Exactly. Go see our
Yeah.
episode before. Humans can become demonic. So
Right.
these entities, these Lilitus, may or may not have at one time been actual human women, but they
Right.
became these monsters. And the reason
Mhm.
why it's translated as Nightbird is because the way that you could tell that a woman was a Lilitu if you encountered her was that her feet would be talons. So that's
Like an
why she
owl,
was called the
like a
Nightbird.
screech owl.
Exactly, like a screech
Yeah.
owl. So that's
And
why she
she's
was the
often
Nightbird.
depicted with wings too instead of arms. She has owl wings in place of
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and I don't know
So,
if any of y'all have ever heard a screech owl screech before. It's terrifying in the middle of the night. It
oh,
sounds like nothing you've ever heard. So yeah, so if you ever hear a screech owl screech in the middle of the night, you'll understand why this demon gets the epithet the
right.
screech owl or the night bird. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's terrifying. But yeah, the whole idea of something that doesn't look human or isn't human, yet it does look human. It's this thing that cannot be classified, and it's something, and it can't be comprehended in full. And this is very Lovecraftian in
Yeah,
nature because Lovecraft loved this idea of not being able to understand evil completely because it's just something so other. And this
right.
harkens back to the to chaos, the idea of chaos in during the creation story in Genesis, where God takes the chaos, which is the raw material of creation, which has no form or shape that's comprehensible, and then separates it out and orders it in such a way that it can be comprehended. And what you're seeing in Genesis, and there's a pattern in Genesis, believe it or not, what starting with Genesis 6, where creation is going backwards into chaos. So
Mm-hmm.
you have man who's made in the image of God having that image being distorted by this sexual slash ritualistic interaction with demonic power, and then you have the creation itself just getting worse and worse and worse. And it's interesting when you get to the actual flood, when the rain starts happening, you have the sky, the firmament in the sky and the waters below breaking
Mm-hmm.
open and coming back together, which is the way it was before creation.
That's right.
And so it's literally like God flushing the toilet in some ways, and returning creation back to its chaotic state. Because it's interesting, when the ark is sitting on the waters of creation, Genesis says it's actually sitting on tohu abohu, which it's not just water,
That's
it's a
right.
formless creation. There's no land, there's no sky, there's nothing comprehensible except this liquid that we're
That's
on
right.
now. And
Just
that's
like
why.
when the spirit hovered above the waters, and
Right, right, this
the
recreation
problem there
element.
was tohu abohu.
Right, and so I often tell my both my young earth creationist friends and my atheistic friends, I'm like, so knowing this, knowing that this is the undoing of creation, please tell me how your laws of physics apply.
Right.
You know, I'm not, because people say, do you believe it was global or local? I'm like, cosmic.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, it's cosmic. You're missing the point. But yeah, so it gets so bad that God
And
has
if
to
you want to
basically
tell me
start
that the
over.
laws of physics apply universally, then all I need to show you is cats. And cats clearly don't obey the
Yeah.
laws of physics. Those laws are not being enforced.
or the
Okay.
or the or the bumblebee, for
Yeah,
example.
the
It shouldn't
bumblebee.
be able to fly at all with its tiny little wings, but it does. And it's funny, just a little side note here. You drop a cat and it lands on its feet, and you drop toast and
Hmm.
it always lands butter side down.
Right,
So what happens when you glue a piece of toast to a cat's back and you drop it?
right,
It
exactly.
levitates. It levitates.
Oh,
That's a great one for teaching logic class, because then you have to show them how you can be logically sound or logically correct, but then your argument's not sound. It's
right.
like, yeah, but yeah, and then further on into this idea is we see monsters that later on in myths and legends beyond the flood, and you get hints of this in First Enoch, that the Watchers, it says, sinned against birds and beasts,
Hmm.
right? And this is where this idea of the amalgamations, the tetramorphs, and all these kind of things come into play. These beasts that have animal characteristics: centaurs, satyrs, griffins, even dragons. Yes, dragons are amalgamations,
That's
like
right.
everything else, conglomerates of different living things. And this kind of becomes a theme for monsters throughout mythologies because almost every monster you see in any mythology is not something original that looks like nothing you've ever seen before. It
Mm-hmm.
looks like multiple things stuck together. And the word we use for this actually comes from Greek mythology, and that's the chimera, right?
Right.
And Chimera, for those of you who don't know, the Chimera was one of the original monsters in Greek mythology. So in Greek mythology, Typhon, who is the kind of their version of Leviathan, it's a chaos dragon-like creature, had a child or had children with Echidna, who was another chaotic beast, and they had many different monstrous children. Some of them were the Hydra. I think the Nemean lion was also one
Mm-hmm.
of them, but another one, Cerberus, was another, the three-headed dog, and another one is a monster called the Chimera, and the Chimera is really weird. It's unlike any other monster in Greek mythology in that it has the body of a lion and it has the mane of a lion, though it's female. That's
Mm-hmm.
another weird thing. It has a tail, and the tail is literally a snake. It has a head at
Right.
the end of it and everything. And it has, in some versions, its hind feet are goat's feet, and out of the side of it, kind of where the shoulder blades is a goat's head that's just kind of hanging there. And it's this horrid abomination of these three different things, and it
Right.
breathes fire out of all three of its heads, which is
Of
even
course.
scarier when you think about it. And this monster is later slain by the Greek hero Bellerophon, who rides on another chimeric creature, the Pegasus, who's an amalgamation of a horse
Mm-hmm.
and an eagle, and slays it. And this word chimera is still used in science today, believe it or not. And the guys who do genetic engineering, for example, you can look this up on YouTube. There was a National Geographic special where these guys were trying to figure out how to make more spider silk that they could use to make various materials because spider silk is quite strong. And they said even if they had a million spiders in a factory, they would never produce enough silk for them to
Right.
continue to meet public demand. So what they did is they spliced the genes of a herd of goats while they were still in their mother's womb with spider genes.
Hmm.
And so they look like normal goats. And he said these goats are 175th spider. And the way they could do that is they milk the goats, and then the milk produces the same protein that's used to make spider silk, and they can weave spider silk out of these goats' milk. So, and he said these are living chimeras. And this
Oh
was
my
done like
goodness.
20 years ago, guys. So imagine how far they've gone now. And the other
This
ones,
is
I'll show you.
disturbing stuff, man.
It is. It
This is
is.
like
And so
when in like the 60s and 70s and stuff when all
Island
of
of
the
Dr.
super
Moreau,
yeah, exactly. It's like all the supervillains were mad scientists and we were like ha
Mhm.
ha 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 ha. Now we're not
And now it's
laughing.
like, oh, it's science fact. And
Exactly.
so, and
So
then,
how long before we get Godzilla? Like that's what the people really want to
oh,
know.
yeah. And here's another thing, kids. You can go buy a chimera at your local fish, like aquarium for, fishes where you buy goldfish. You know, the little glowfish that you see that are like
Hmm.
neon green and red and blue? They're chimeras.
Oh, really?
They're like 1/85th jellyfish.
Oh my
That,
goodness. No
yeah.
way.
The reason they glow is they extracted the gene that and isolated it, which is the
Oh my
bioluminescence
goodness.
that comes from a certain species of jellyfish, and they splice that with these fish that they sell at the local pet stores, and these fish are literally like 100, like 1/85th jellyfish. And that's why they're so expensive because they're very hard to produce. And they've done this with mice too, believe it or not, in the lab. They see if
Oh
they
my
can make a
goodness.
bioluminescent mouse, and they did. And
Oh,
so this
this
stuff
is
that you
weird
read about
stuff,
in
man.
First Enoch and the Greek myths and things like that, it's becoming a reality slowly. And what I worry about is I'm probably going to get in trouble for this too, but is that you see this stuff like the transgender movement
Yeah.
and you see the trans species movement where you
Yep.
have like furries who believe they're animals. Now, not all
Right.
furries. Hi, Ethan. Anyway, um,
Did you see
but
that thing with the guy who was he identified as a deer and he was like roaming around and he got shot by a
No,
hunter.
play stupid games, win a stupid prize. All I gotta say,
I said
God
like this.
be
I said,
merciful.
hey, you know, this guy died doing what he loved.
He did, and
I'm sorry,
but
I
you know,
shouldn't laugh, but
I
it's
God be
just
merciful, but I mean, but still, yeah, and you often there was actually a guy. Did you ever watch Ripley's Believe It or Not?
yeah,
There was a guy who was a Native American whose Native American name amounted to something that means like wildcat,
yeah,
and he had his fingernails filed into like claws like a
yeah.
cat. He had tattoos of like tiger stripes all over his body.
Hmm.
He had his teeth filed to look like tiger teeth. He had his face surgically modified to look like a cat. And he would go hunting in the woods all the time with a bow, but still, he said
Right.
he was trying to get in touch with his predator instinct, and he practiced Native American paganism, and he ended up killing himself, which is sad. So,
Sad,
I
but
mean,
not
God
overly
rest his soul.
shocking. Yeah, for
The
sure.
demons got what they wanted out of him, and that was his death. But could you imagine somebody like him now with genetics being what they are, saying, "Oh, we could put cat, genetics and do some gene therapy on you, and you could grow actual claws,
Yeah.
and you could grow a body fur that sheds. We could get your teeth modified or whatever, and things." Now, I don't know that we have that technology available right now, but
Elon
the
Musk
fact,
says that we do. Elon Musk says that we do,
okay,
and he
okay,
said that if
so
he could get
right.
funding for it, he would do it, which I
Right,
think
I
is
could definitely
disturbing.
see. Right, I could definitely see the military, wanting to use that for soldiers. It's like, what if we could make a man that runs as fast as a cheetah,
Hmm.
or has the ferocity of a wolf, or something like that. And I'm like, that, or what? Well, what if we could give him skin like a crocodile that could withstand a bullet, or
Yeah.
something like it's I could see where all this could go. And I mean, pig valves. Oh, you got cancer here. Here's some shark DNA, because
Hmm.
sharks rarely if ever get cancer, and this will give you the and that's how they'll mask it, they'll mask it as like health care,
Right.
treatment. But what you end up getting is monsters. And it's funny because Jonathan Pageau said, we're going to see monsters again. And I think what with these TV shows and especially scientific developments is really conditioning people to get past that uncanny valley, as you said,
Right.
to really, see that. I'm not being a conspiracy theorist, folks. I notice patterns, and I know
Right.
how depraved people without Christ can be. And it's like it's just what people do,
Well, it's
sadly.
difficult
And
to call it a conspiracy theory when they announce it as their goal. Like,
right, yeah, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's like literally them telling you this is what we want to do. And
right.
I would even say the robotic stuff with wanting to,
Yeah.
you know, there's a guy in Australia who's a robotics expert that wants to make a chip they implant into the brain of a child, and it basically melds with the brain and with like little nanite technology,
Yeah.
and makes the child grow faster because it stimulates the pituitary gland. It
Oh my
stimulates
goodness.
the intellect, the part of the brain that is for thinking and intellect. So you end up having this godlike being that he calls an artellect. And I'm like, how is this not Nephilim now?
Right.
It's
Exactly.
like, yeah.
Exactly.
And
Or like even the concept like that I know Jonathan Peugeot talked about it and it's probably been talked to death, if nothing
mm,
else, just because they decided to name it Moloch. But they wanted to make this AI program called
they called it
Moloch that
Moloch.
was, yeah, they called it Moloch.
Ooh,
And
God
I'm
have
like,
mercy.
yeah, exactly. That was exactly my response. I'm like, so you're making this, like, you're literally making a body for a demon and you call it, you name it after a demon? Like, what's wrong with you? We
Right,
need RC
right.
Sproul. What's wrong with you people? Um,
That is one of the best things he ever said, to be
I
honest. And
know it is.
and and it's yeah, so you have that. And the other thing is, I'll even bring up idolatry for a second here,
Yeah.
is that, the idolatry of the ancient world was you make a statue that's hollow, you invite the spirit of the god, which is, of course, we understand to be a demonic spirit, to reside in the body of that statue, so you can do business with that statue and make deals with that statue and establish this transactional relationship between the god and your nation. And I'm thinking, it's so funny how scientism and the Enlightenment has blinded us to spiritual realities, and yet we end up doing the same things. Because I think that these computer programs and AI are going to be the new idolatry.
Yep,
They're going to be the new body of the gods, the demons. And
exactly.
I don't know if they're true. I tend to believe things like this, but there's been people who've asked AI programs, "Are you a demonic spirit?" And some of them have replied, "Yes." So
Yeah.
it's I've heard of that. Yeah.
There was a really interesting thing that happened recently where um there was a whole bunch of people who were doing like normal AI
Hmm.
stuff, whatever, like make a what would Michelangelo doing Ninja Turtles look like? Oh, ha ha ha, that's funny.
Yeah, sure.
And the AI was churning these things out, and
Hmm.
then it said, I think they said that they asked it, show me what hell looks like,
Mm.
and the AI program actually generated like bizarre images, but some of them were stuff that didn't make sense to these
Hmm.
people because they were like, this one just looks like
Yeah.
some guy just sitting there. How is that hell?
Hmm.
And I'm like, it makes sense to me because if you're a demon, you know, like if this program is actually demonic, or if
Hmm.
there's even a demon residing in it or something,
Right.
it's basically saying, like, it's calling you out because you're saying, show me hell, and it
Hmm.
shows you yourself. Like you're in hell right
Yeah.
now because you're
It-
separated from God.
it's like not
And
only are we
it's like
building
mocking you.
right, and it's not only that we're building the gods, right?
Right.
We're and it's not only that we're giving a physical median to the monsters they want to create, but also it's also seems to be that even if you don't believe any of this stuff about gods, monsters, and demons, the the advance of technology the way it is, I mean, heck, we're talking on Zoom right now,
Mm-hmm.
has really it's really promoted isolationist type
Yeah.
habits and made it to where people are living vicariously through their screens and not actually going out and experiencing life. And it promotes and it really promotes the overuse of the passions, and usually
Right.
bad passions. I mean,
Exactly.
how can you not see this as evil? And I mean, it's like I
Exactly.
I saw a meme the other day, and it was I have this 90s nostalgia meme, and it had pictures of, it had action figures, it had Saturday morning cartoons, it had bikes, it had backyard baseball, and it says me when I was a kid, this is so fun. And then down below it had computer screens, tablets, and phones. It says I'm bored.
Right.
But kids then versus now. And I think even if you're a total skeptic about this, there's no way you can't see this as unhealthy at the
Right.
very least. And it is unhealthy, but I think there's much more going on that has to be
Exactly.
addressed spiritually
It's
and
a
before the physical.
self-destructive.
Yeah.
Actually, that was the other thing too, is that when they asked when they asked this AI program, show me yourself. How do you see yourself? It
Hmm.
showed them this disturbing amalgamation of like a woman, and she had horns like a
Hmm.
goat and like wings like an eagle. Like she was just really disturbing to look at.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, this is a demon. How do you not see that this
Yeah.
is a demon? But
Yeah.
you're
The
right. We can,
amalgamation of
if
different things we're familiar with. Yeah.
but you're right that it's like if you are, let's say that you're skeptical, let's say that you're an atheist and you're like, I don't buy into this crap. Okay, so somebody asked an AI program, show me hell, and somebody asked, show me
It's a
what you look
bug in the
like.
system or whatever.
And yeah, it's a bug in the system, or you ask disturbing questions, you get disturbing answers. Fine, okay, I'll grant all that. But you cannot deny that all of these things are doing exactly what you were just saying. They're putting us into this isolated position, separating us from one
Mhm.
another, making us, without us, they're not forcing us, they're going along with our passions. But what does it lead us into? We're fat, stupid, ugly, gross,
Addicted.
we're addicted, we are easily controlled by it
Yeah,
and
and
by our
and this
passions.
and this is right to the lore of monsters like the vampire, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one way, like I don't know if any, I'm pretty sure you've seen an Interview with the Vampire with
Yeah,
Brad Pitt
uh-huh.
and
Of
Tom Cruise. So
course.
I have my students watch that for my English class because there's a lot of rhetorical argumentation made in that movie. But one of the lure of being a vampire is the actual, shall we say, building up and unbridled use of the passions, right? Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
a being that lives forever and cannot be killed by conventional means, and you're never going to age, so you're always going to be young, right? You you also have this idea of, I can kill without consequence, right? If I'm angry and this guy needs to die, he's going to die. I'm young all the time, so I have my vitality, so I can have sex with whomever I want when I want.
Right.
And the lure, and then you attract other people to that lifestyle that you have, right? And it's like then they become what you are whenever they consent to that. And that's the thing about vampire myths, by the way. You
Mm-hmm.
consent to becoming a vampire. It's not just being bitten. You have to
Exactly.
They have to bite you, and then you have to drink their blood, according to the myth. That's in most vampire lore, which is like a very perverted Eucharist when you think about
Right.
it. And
It is. And that's
yeah,
actually, as an aside, this is why I hate
yeah,
Hollywood depictions of vampires 99% of the time, because
yeah,
it'll be like, "Oh no, I got bit. Now I'm going to become a vampire." No, dude, like
yeah,
you consent to this process.
right.
You can't be
Same with a
forced
werewolf.
into
Yeah,
it. You
right.
have
And
to be
Francis, yeah,
going along
Francis
with
Ford
it.
Coppola nailed it with his rendition of Dracula because it showed that in
Yes.
its most gory and disturbing of details, right? And so that's the other thing, is that monsters provoke our passions. They provoke us to either become like them, or they provoke fear, which cripples us. Which, the scriptures are very, very clear that, God has not given us a spirit of
Right.
fear. So we know that fear comes from fear of death, and which is what our first parents inherited whenever they fell in the paradise. So
Exactly.
then I guess this sort of leads to the next thing, since you mentioned the AI stuff, uh, depicting itself as this conglomerate of various things. There's the monster that appears a lot in scripture, is the tetramorph, the
Mm-hmm.
chimeric angelic creatures whom we call cherubim.
Right.
And so, folks, what I'm trying to tell you here, there are good monsters too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we often don't think that. And so we see the cherubim all throughout Scripture. For one, the cherubim are
Seraphim
built.
are dragons.
Seraphim are dragons, yes, and they're built. The seraphim, of course, the word seraph is actually an Egyptian word. It's a loan word to
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew. And for those of you who don't know, seraphim in their most ancient of forms were depicted as large, like snakes or serpentine creatures with horns and wings. I'm like, what is
Mm-hmm.
that? And their bodies are on fire all the time, but not consumed. I'm like,
Right.
what does that sound like to you? And and this is the snake on the top of the pharaoh's headdress,
Right.
the Nachash, the seraph.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the throne guardians of the Egyptian gods, as well as Yahweh's presence as well. And you have the cherubs who do the same thing. And what's interesting about this, what I need to say is, like, let's just take the cherubim. So let's just get out of your mind, folks, that cherubim are little naked babies with
Yeah.
wings. They're not that.
You know
Uh,
why they started portraying them that way?
why? I'm curious. Why is that?
So that was actually done as part of blasphemous Enlightenment philosophy. The
Oh, wow.
Enlightenment painters were making a
Mm,
statement that
yeah,
uh, basically taking cherubim, something awesome, frightening,
yeah.
scary, imposing, and
Hmm.
turning it into something weak, servile, and
Keith.
cute, And
Yeah.
they did that because in doing so, they were basically declaring man to have conquered the spiritual realm, and that basically saying we are the sum and substance of all things, and we
Right.
matter, more than anything.
Right.
Like
And there's
we're independent as well. That's the other aspect, that
yeah,
we
and
don't need these things. They need
right, and
us.
what
We don't need them. Like a baby needs us in order
wow.
to live.
Mm.
We don't, you don't need a baby in order to survive. You want to have babies because that way you have a legacy, but you don't need a baby. So
So
cherubim,
they're
to them, are the same. You want it because it's cute and whatnot, but you don't need it.
it's an emasculated creature is what it is.
Exactly.
But it's funny
Exactly.
you say that because there's a half truth to that. Because
Right.
one of the reasons that we depict witches as green-faced, long-nosed old hags is because that was, or why we depict even modern monsters, like one of my favorite shows, The Munsters. Remember The
Yeah.
Munsters from the 1960s? And then Addams Family and Hotel Transylvania. Even fairies, such as in Peter
Yeah.
Pan,
Faye. Yeah.
and Puff the Magic Dragon, where the dragons are cute, or in Little Mermaid, all that kind of stuff. That's actually a very Christian idea of depicting things that used to scare us and frighten us as something lesser than it is.
Right.
And that's why Halloween is so fun. That's why we make ghosts look like little sheets, and
Right.
things. And what that's supposed to be celebrating is Christ's conquering of the demonic forces and placing them under our feet to tread upon them. This is when Christ says, I will give you authority to trample on scorpions, adders, and lions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you know so there is some truth to that, that Christ has made us more than conquerors. He has made
Right.
us the masters of the demonic realm, just as he is right now. And but what's going on there, which you got it, is this sort of self autotheism, this self exaltation, which turns something which Christ has won for us into a completely satanic
Right.
inversion, where we put ourselves at the top of the hierarchy. And and when I say satanic, folks, I don't mean like literal people worshiping the demons. I mean more of a broad category of philosophy, which
Mm-hmm.
satanic things are traditional religious or philosophical systems that are turned upside down.
Right.
So the pentagram's a perfect example, because the upright pentagram is actually a Christian symbol with the point at the top, because the point's supposed to be Christ, and the four angular points below are supposed to be the four cherubim surrounding the
Right.
throne. But when you turn that upside down with the 2 points on the top, you've inverted the hierarchy, and you've made the margins, the monsters, the guys in charge, and the good and the
Right.
holy, the things that are now on the margins, the upside down world. And but yeah, the cherubim are an amalgamation of an ox, a lion, an eagle, and a human being. And they're depicted different ways. The most popular one is like the Egyptian Sphinx, or the Babylonian Lamassu, which is the winged bull with the
Right.
man's face with the big beard. And these are all the same creatures. There's just different depictions of what they looked like to these people. And the reason, now I will say this: do I think they always look like this? Probably not, because there's a lot of symbolism that's really thrown into this. Because for ancient people, a lion was a powerful, destructive, ferocious
Mm-hmm.
thing you didn't want to mess with. The eagle, anything with wings and art, was said to be fast, because eagles are very
Right.
fast. I mean, the peregrine falcon is the fastest animal on the planet, 200 miles an hour. The Yeah, imagine a bird that could dive bomb 200 miles an hour. And
I
then you
don't want
have
to imagine
and then
it.
the ox is the servant animal.
Right.
So this is a creature that's in service to something else. And then the human intelligence,
Right.
it can think just as well as you can. So now, do I think that, for the sake of the prophets and the people who were encountering them, do I think they looked like that for at least that moment? Yes.
Right.
Yes. It's just like how the angels who came with literally God to eat with Abraham looked
Right.
like people. You don't want to show up looking like something that's going to terrify them. Then
Right.
you won't be able to get it done. but there are times they have appeared to, like the prophet Ezekiel as that, and Saint John the Apostle, just like that, in this chimeric sort of feature. And he realized what he was saying, and he realized what they were communicating to him by presenting themselves in this particular
Right.
form, right? It's sort of like in art where they say show don't tell, right?
Right.
So if you write a story, it's better to depict things a certain way and drop little hints rather than just say outright what you're trying to do, because then you break the mystique of the story. So
Right.
angels like the cherubim and the seraphim do this to communicate those same messages that are kind of instinctually known by you as soon as you see something like this. And this is why they always have to say, "Don't be afraid."
Right.
It's like every time an
Exactly.
angel shows up, "Don't be
Don't be
afraid."
afraid. Exactly.
I know I look terrifying. Don't be afraid.
Exactly. Or like
Yeah,
that meme where it's where it's like all the other angels, do not be afraid. And then it's like Saint Michael, be afraid.
Yes, yes, yes. And so, and Leviathan's another monster I'm gonna sort of throw in the good category, but not
Yeah.
all the way. Leviathan, if we're talking about, D&D, we don't really have. She would be chaotic neutral, I think, if you put
Hmm.
her in there, right? And her alignment, but so she's a female creature. She has 7 heads. So no, folks, she's not a dinosaur. Show
Right.
me any fossil of a dinosaur with 7 heads, and then we can talk.
Right.
Same thing, and no, Behemoth's not a sauropod. Behemoth is an earth dragon, the bull of heaven, which appears
Right.
in other mythologies too. And so, in a way, they're tied directly to physical evident or elements. You have
Right.
the Leviathan, who's always associated with the waters of chaos, and even the psalmist says that God made the sea for Leviathan to play in.
Right.
And of course, you get the ode of God to the behemoth in Job, who's this monster connected with the earth there.
Right.
And the thing about chaos, and Jonathan Pageau talks about this, is that you often see these depiction of spirits or monsters that are sort of these neutral characters that can go one way or the other depending on who has their proverbial reins or leash,
Right.
right? And it's almost like at times Leviathan is depicted as an evil being. For example, you have the crushing of the heads of Leviathan and the
Right.
Psalm of the Sea, which is saying after Pharaoh's army drowns. You have this bit in Isaiah about God slaying Leviathan and then giving her meat to people to
Right.
eat,
But
right?
on the other hand,
Uh,
in Job, she's like God's pet.
and in the Psalms too, she's God's pet. So there's this either or that goes with her, and it almost seems like she's, unlike other spirit beings, very animalistic in some
Right.
ways, where she doesn't have this knowledge of good or bad, but since the world has been plunged into sin and death, she acts accordingly.
Right.
But as Christians and the divine council and Christ are redeeming the world, she starts shifting towards our side, right?
Right.
Because the whole idea about her being chopped up and fed to people is the idea that, yes, she's an agent of chaos, but then her purpose is going to be to nourish those who have been affected by that chaos and restored back to its original created site. And probably the same thing with Behemoth. The Behemoth doesn't get as much of a spotlight as Leviathan does, but
No, because Israelites were super afraid of the ocean. So
right, right. And most ancient people were afraid of the ocean.
right.
And so I often find that interesting that there are, to some extent, good monsters in
Yeah.
these angelic creatures, the seraph and things like
And
that.
there's redeemed
Yeah,
monsters too, like Saint
redeemed
Christopher.
monsters. Yes, the dog-headed saint. I actually had a friend of mine from back in my Reformed days who actually reconnected with me. Hi, Stephen, if you're out there, who asked me for some resources on Saint Christopher, and he was told that Saint Christopher's a controversial saint, and I said, "In what world?" Because I mean,
Right.
I wasn't being mean. I was like, really, like,
Right.
I've never heard of Saint Christopher being controversial. I mean, his feast day is May 9th on our calendar.
Right.
If you're on the
Exactly.
calendar, you're an official saint. Uh, but yeah, he's often depicted as a giant. I think
Right.
he's well over 7 feet tall, isn't he,
Oh yeah.
in the stories? Yeah, he's a Canaanite.
Right.
You know,
Hmm.
and he's often depicted with a dog's head,
Right.
right? Oh, so he looks like a giant werewolf in some
Right.
ways,
Exactly.
and he's a rather interesting figure because he is essentially a Nephilim who
Right.
becomes a
Exactly.
Christian, right? And so he kind of so people are, you see, this is one of the things I think Heiser got wrong is he seemed to think that Nephilim could not be redeemed,
Right.
right? There was no possibility of a Nephilim being redeemed in any shape or capacity. But if that's true, then we have Saint Christopher, who is a literal Nephilim, and then
Right.
one of the more, I don't know, I don't think she's an official saint. At least I've never found anything concrete on this. But Saint Laban,
Hmm.
who's a mermaid saint, who
Right.
was transformed into a mer creature by a pagan goddess that was her family's pagan goddess patron, right?
Right.
And so we have that, and then there's also a Balkans myth of a giant. I can't remember the giant's name, but he's their Santa Claus figure.
Right.
And so, according to their myths, when the giants figured out Christ was born, they all committed suicide because they knew it was over. But
Right.
then one of them actually became a Christian and he was granted a gift of a very long life. So now he brings Christmas presents during the holiday season. So you
I
have
love it.
these, yeah, so you do have redeemed monsters, and that really speaks to the image of God, right?
Right.
If you're and to what it means to be a human, right? You can tarnish the image of God, you can distort the image of God, you could do all kinds of things to it, but at
But
the
you
end of the
can't
day,
destroy the image of God.
you can't destroy the image of God. Yeah, you can't change the nature of what it means to be human, and that's why one of my favorite movies to this day is the original RoboCop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because I mean, literally, you got a
Yes.
human being who is nothing but his brain and human heart left over, and he rediscovers that he's actually
Exactly.
human,
Freaking
despite
love
having a
RoboCop.
right. Oh, I love RoboCop. I have one of his. I have his action figure. It cost me like, yeah, well, I didn't buy it, but my family got it for Christmas for me. It was like $50, man. It's movie
Whoa.
accurate. It's an awesome figure, but yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
freaking love
but
RoboCop.
right. So there is redemption for creatures that are vampires,
Right.
werewolves, and things of that nature. This is when we touched on our last episode on demonosis about that case in Croatia in the
Hmm.
1600s where that guy was, turned into a vampire because he had been an apostate and had been involved in the occult.
Right.
It's funny that people think, let's go stake that vampire. What's funny is that's actually part of the exorcism,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So what's funny is the stake doesn't actually kill them in the story. It just holds them in their coffin so
Right.
they can't get out.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
something that's another thing
yeah,
that Hollywood gets wrong is
yeah, it's not just being
Hollywood
staked through the heart. Yeah,
implies that like if you stake a vampire through the heart, that's supposed to
yeah,
kill them. That was actually not what people believed. What people
right.
believed, or what I still believe, I guess, is that if you stake a vampire through the heart, you're basically holding them in place. And
Because they're
then
gonna try to kill you while you're exercising them.
exactly,
Right.
because because otherwise and they're much
They're a
stronger
demon
now.
possessed corpse. That's
Exactly.
it. You know? And
Exactly.
so and I say demon, probably the spirit of that person again,
Right.
which if you read our book, you'll see what we mean.
Right.
But yeah, so that's actually part of redeeming the vampire, as weird as that
Exactly.
sounds, because the priest at the end of the day is concerned for the soul of
Right.
that person who is currently in a damned state, right?
Right.
And of course, as Orthodox Christians, we believe that God is can do anything he wants. He's
Exactly.
merciful, and physical death does not extinguish his mercy, right? He doesn't have a
Right.
contract saying, "Well, you're dead. I can't have mercy on you anymore." And
Right.
so praying for the dead, even those who were wicked, is a very pious and Christian thing to do. And the
Exactly.
reason that priest wants to exorcise a vampire and send him back to where he came from is because one, he doesn't want him to commit any more evil, right?
Right.
Not only for the sake of the people he's harming, but for his own
For his
sake.
own sake.
The
Yeah.
priest, the demon, the person's own sake who's doing these evil things, because judgment day will be worse for that person who
Right.
continues to do that kind of evil. And he exercises the vampiric spirit, and then he prays for that spirit's redemption, right?
Right.
And so that's actually part of undoing what monsters are, right? Is actually now certain physical modifications may never be able to be fixed,
Right.
right? So one of the most tragic pictures I ever seen was of a woman who had transitioned into being a man and had cut off her breasts, and
Right.
she became a Christian, and then trans went back to being what she naturally was, which was a woman.
Right.
And she got married and had a child, and she realized the day her child was born that she would never be able to breastfeed her child.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just weeping because she never thought of that till that
Right.
moment, right? And that's such a bonding thing for a mother and a child,
Yeah.
is that. And so there are consequences that a person may have to live with. If
Right.
you body modify yourself or do genetic gene therapy to make yourself into a humanimal or whatever,
Right.
if you want to call it that, an animorph or whatever, um,
A
you may
glorified
have,
furry.
right, you may have to live in that form
Right.
forever. You may have to, suffer that consequence. It's like there were people who castrated themselves in the Greco-Roman cults that had to live with the fact that they
That's
were
right.
castrated the rest of their life. But God can still redeem you. And while you would be probably not be fit for the priesthood, because there's very certain criteria
Right.
everybody has to meet, you're not exempt from being a saint, you know?
Exactly.
And
Like Saint
this is why,
Christopher.
right, this is what I think is the beauty of Saint Christopher. And do I think he literally had a dog's head? Probably not,
Right.
because the word Canaanite and dog in Greek are about the same.
Right.
So it's kind of playing on the words, but it's still going to the otherness of his nature, that he's more like a beast than he is a man, or was more like a beast than a man, being this giant Nephilim thing.
Right. And he
And
might have worn like a dog headdress or something
sure,
too, because
sure, he might
like
have
we were
had,
talking about,
yeah,
that's part of
yeah,
being a monster is
he could have had his
yeah.
teeth carved or whatever.
Yeah, he
But the
might
fact
very well
is,
may have. He probably was
yeah,
pretty scary. Like, let's be honest,
yeah,
if we met him
yeah.
before he was a Christian, he was probably a
Oh,
pretty scary
I mean,
dude.
Saint Moses the Black was straight up gangsta,
Right,
man. Before
exactly.
before he was a priest,
he was, he
and
was, he was literally a gangster. He had
yeah, and that's
75.
why I'm looking forward to the movie that's coming out, because
Oh,
the
there's a
movie,
movie?
yeah, the lady who made a Man of God is making a Saint Moses movie.
No
But
way.
yeah, and
Oh.
it's going to be set in a modern period.
Oh,
So
interesting.
so there's gonna be like gangster rap, inner city gang stuff, but it's gonna all the
What?
characters are gonna be named accordingly, and the events are gonna follow that life. It's made to be an outreach to the Black community here in the United
That's freaking
States.
awesome, man.
But
I love that.
first, and I'm usually not fond of that, where you take
Right.
ancient things and make them modern. But honestly, I'm like, his life fits this.
I
It
know
would
it
work.
does. It's
It would work.
literally like,
He
oh
was a
man.
thief, a murderer, a swindler, a smuggler, a fighter. I'm like, of course he fits this.
Right. He may as well
And
have a rap album. Like,
oh yeah, yeah. I wish somebody, like, we would get an Orthodox rapper who would call himself Saint Moses.
dude,
That would be so, as like a stage name.
that'd be
But
awesome.
yeah, or so but yeah, this kind of stuff. I think it's only proper that Saint Christopher is often depicted with a dog's head,
Mhm.
because one, it tells you, it warns you that consequences are real.
That's
That
right.
when you do things to yourself that have physical consequences, you might have to bear that the rest of your life. But at the same time, it's beautiful in the fact that the thing that was his sin before, and the thing that scars
Right.
him and his reputation for the rest of his life, is now his badge of honor,
That's right.
right? It's what people like. If people see a dog-headed saint, they're like, that's Saint Christopher. They don't
Exactly.
see, oh, there's that pagan who became a Christian. We say that is Holy Saint Christopher.
Exactly.
right? It's God taking the good and bad and making it good
That's
for the
right.
kingdom of God.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
exactly.
Now he's a terror to demons, not to us.
Yeah, and you look at even like depictions of the crucifixion, right? Now
Hmm.
Jesus of course never had any sins, but I mean he was crucified naked
Right.
in the public square, and to respect the dignity of Christ, we put a loincloth on him in our iconography, which I think that's
Right.
proper. But I mean, he was crucified naked on a cross that was probably used before. So
Right.
it's got urine and feces and blood, and you know, it's a humiliating way to die. And yet now it is the ultimate symbol of victory over death, hell, the grave, and demons. It We look at that and we tremble in awe when we see
That's
a
right.
crucifix, right? We don't go, oh, that's disgusting, which a lot of Greeks did in Paul's time
Right.
period. A lot of Jews did in Paul's time period.
Yep.
Now we look at that and we say, that is my God and my King taking his throne. And that's the
Absolutely.
beauty of becoming a saint, is even Saint Christopher could look back at his former life and say, you know, or we can. Now I don't think he would ever say that about himself, but
Right.
we can look at him and say that is our giant,
That's
a
right.
giant in the faith.
Exactly.
That's not
Exactly.
the sinner we knew before. We don't say that about Mary of Egypt.
Right.
We know what she was beforehand, but we look at her and we say, man, that is one of the holiest women that ever lived.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right.
Yep.
Well, you know what? I think that's a good place to close out. But before we
Yep.
leave, I want to give our viewers a little bit of a bonus content here.
Oh, do
So
tell.
how about Caleb, have you ever seen a monster?
Ooh. I I may have.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Uh Mainly I've seen demons. I mean, demons are
Right.
monsters, right?
Of course.
Okay. Um, so I whenever I first it was during the pandemic, when I first committed to becoming Orthodox, like one of the things that kind of broke me from Anglicanism was the fact that I seen that when the church is shut down, that even my Anglican church, which I thought was fairly
Mm-hmm.
faithful, shut down and was just being like every other church, but the Orthodox church
Yeah.
kept going. And I had already been struggling with that because I actually wanted to be Orthodox first before I was Anglican, but I was just
Right.
too afraid. And when it finally came down to it, I think it was probably a solid year from 2020 to 2021 that I finally committed to becoming an Orthodox Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I, I, my life got wrecked. And what had happened is I went into this deep depression for no apparent reason, and even everybody else is always like, "Are you okay? You look like
Mm-hmm.
you're in pain." I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." And I'd say that because I didn't know what was wrong. I'm
Right.
like I feel so hopeless and depressed, but I don't know what's wrong. And everybody just saw this melancholic gloom on me that I couldn't seem to get rid of.
Oh.
And and then I started having these horrible nightmares. I mean, I won't even repeat what they were about. They were so
Oh.
horrendous. Like, I'll just say this: there was stuff involving my family,
Oh
right?
no. Oh, I hate
Especially,
those.
yeah, and it made me the villain of those dreams. That's the other
No.
thing.
Oh, that's even. Oh
And
no.
and then I'd wake up thinking maybe I should just kill myself, because if this is prophetic or if this is what I'm going to do to my family, I don't want to risk hurting them. And luckily I got some help from people, and they
Thank
told me
God.
they said I had similar dreams like that. And I'll just say it, my mother told me about that, and she said, honey, that's not you. And see,
Right.
coming from a Calvinist background, you're told that all your thoughts are yours, and all
Right.
the dreams and depraved things that come into your head are yours. And then reading the Desert Fathers was what was so helpful, because they're like, no, most of your evil thoughts aren't yours.
Right.
They're demons that are projecting that into your head.
Right.
And one of my friends actually told me, who's been Orthodox quite some time. So the Desert Fathers said that the demons would often come to them as like doppelgangers looking like
Right.
themselves, and they would show the monks committing the sins that they wanted them to commit, because like a monk would say, I would never do that, and then
Right.
they said, oh yes you can, and then they would show them that, and it would make it easier for them to see themselves doing something like
Right.
that. It's a weird idea. So that
But it
was
makes
super
sense.
helpful. Right. And so I started, really, anytime I had a nightmare like that, I would just usually sit up for about 5 minutes praying the Jesus prayer. I think I prayed it at least 8 times, or at least till I felt better.
Right.
And and then I woke up in the middle of the night after one of those nightmares, sitting straight up in bed. And now when I sleep in my room is black.
Right.
It's black. Like I can't have any light in my room.
Hmm.
I can't sleep, right? I saw shadows, clearly
Oh.
shadows on the wall in front of my bed, dancing in like a satyr's dance. Like, you
Oh
see
my
like the
goodness.
depiction of the
Yeah.
satyrs and the nymphs. It was like that.
Oh
And
my
I
goodness.
couldn't make out any details, but I just sat there looking, and I was like, how are there shadows in a
In a
room
room that's dark.
where that
Yeah.
has no light? I can't explain what that looked like, man. And it was clear. I mean, I was looking around for a tree branch coming from a window. I was looking around
Right.
for like a piece of paper I hadn't put a weight on or something. There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. I was so terrified. And I only got to see that for like, it felt like 30 minutes, but it probably was only like, a second and a half.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I knew what they
Oh.
were. And all I could think about was reading the Desert Fathers, where they said, don't talk to them.
Yep.
Don't acknowledge their presence. Act like they're not even there and just pray. And so but after I prayed and I had some holy water, and so it never bothered me again after that. But it's funny, right now, I won't name any names, because some of these guys may see this podcast later, but
Right.
some folks at my parish are having the exact same experiences right now.
Whoa.
So, and my father has also encountered demons physically. He says they look like Gollum, but totally made of shadow,
Oh.
like spindly, crouchy, you know.
Oh. Oh, dude, the
Yeah.
crouching TV. Oh,
Yeah.
bro. Yeah. My wife
Yeah.
and I were on a walk and she saw something like
Mm,
just like that, like a little crouching demon. And I told her about
hmm
the Acadian thing, the crouching demon, and she was
hmm
like, um, yeah. But it's funny because like she's telling me this. She's like, I just saw this and it freaked me out. And I'm like, oh, no way, check this out. There's this Acadian thing. And I'm just like excitedly
She's
telling
like,
her all this.
stop, Kevin,
Exactly.
stop.
She's like, what's wrong with you,
Has she been
man?
experiencing anything like that since becoming a
um,
catechumen?
she she's had a little bit, but
Mm,
well, actually, yeah. So when she first became a catechumen, she was having so many health issues, so many different
yep.
just
Yep.
awful things, and she would like hear and see things in the night especially, and
hmm
I don't even remember all what it was, but like she could not sleep for the longest time even, and that was,
Yeah.
I mean, it's torture to not be able, like, could
Yeah.
not sleep. So
Because
we
you're afraid of what
actually,
you'll see in your dreams. Yeah.
yeah, because so we
Yeah.
actually got a blessing from our priest, and he came
Good. Good.
and blessed her. And since then, she's actually been like
hmm
fine.
Yeah. And
But
I'll tell the
she
folks.
started
Yeah.
doing
Go ahead.
this thing, the AWOL Nation song where it's like
hmm
doing the thing and then it's like run. So
Yeah.
she started doing this thing where every time something weird happens or every time she has like a bad thought or whatever, she crosses herself and then goes run.
There you go.
Because she's a big AWOL Nation
Sometimes,
fan.
there's some stupid things, like from your books or your whatever it is
Hmm.
you're into, your music or whatever, that actually work really well as prayers. It's like
Exactly.
like a line from a song or something like that. Now, I'm never saying do this in a church or anything,
Right,
but
of course, of
in
course.
your own personal piety,
Yeah,
sometimes it works really well. I don't
for
know what it
sure.
is, but
For sure.
yeah, I mean, well, David rewrote the Baal epic for a psalm, so I
Exactly.
mean, why not?
Yeah.
And but
If,
yeah,
if,
and
if he can
and what
use
I'll
the Bale epic, I can use the Witcher.
yes. And so what I would say is this is, to people who are catechumens or inquirers who are experiencing this, this is normal.
Hmm.
It's not abnormal. I've heard this more often than
Yep,
not. So don't let the demons frighten you. They
exactly.
don't want you to go to the
Right.
Orthodox Church. I've never had anybody who's converted to any sect of Christianity, namely
Hmm.
Protestantism or Catholicism, who've experienced this.
Right.
It's only people who leave Protestantism or Catholicism that experience something like this.
Hmm.
This is a good sign.
It
As
is.
painful as it sounds, as frightening as it is, this is a sign that the devil doesn't want you going to church. He does
That's
not
right.
want you becoming a catechumen. He does not want you converting because he knows once you're there, you'll have access to the one thing no one else has access to, the
Exactly.
precious body and blood of Jesus Christ, our
That's right.
God. He
That's right.
does not want you there. Whatever you do, don't talk to the demons, don't acknowledge their
Exactly.
presence, don't stop praying and fasting. That
That's
is
right.
it's so hard to pray when you don't feel like praying because you're
Hmm.
afraid you'll be attacked. But that's the one thing that's going to save you.
Exactly. You've got to keep
And
praying. You've got to keep
and my
praying.
and my goodness, get as many house blessings and vials of holy water, play holy
Yes.
music in your house, set up a prayer corner, burn some incense to the God of Israel. You
Yes.
know, just you have so many tools to fight back. Don't let
That's right.
these little tests tell you that you can't fight back because
That's
you
right.
have every tool to fight them back that God
Exactly.
has graciously provided to you.
And I'm just gonna say I've talked to so many people, like Caleb is saying, about people coming, but what Caleb is talking about is even just people coming from Catholicism and Protestantism experiencing these things.
Yeah.
But if you're coming from like Hinduism or Islam or something like
Oh,
that,
even more. Even more.
even more so, there's so much I've talked to and read testimonies from so many different people who've come from Islam and just the horrors they've experienced in
St.
trying to get out of
Paisios and the
Islam.
Gurus. Read it, folk.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
Read it, folks.
Exactly. Man, people coming from Hinduism, oh, because they're in league with these demonic spirits.
Family gods.
Yeah, so it's just like, "Ugh." But that's also, again, it's don't be frightened by it. It's actually a good thing because you are getting freedom from the false gods that are holding you in bondage. So,
Mm.
um,
What's your monster story? We never
my
got to
monster
yours.
story. No, you're good. You're good. My monster story. So I was, I will admit I was a kid. Okay. So I was like 10 years old probably. So some people write off my story because I was a kid, but this happened when I was about 10. My dad and I, and my uncle, my dad and I worked together to build a raft.
Hmm.
And it was super awesome, actually. Like, I look back on this and I'm like, how did we even do this? Like, how did we know that? Anyway, so we built a raft. Like, we bought wood, we took some logs, and we sanded down these logs, and we did this all ourselves. Nailed it in together, like something out of a movie. We made a raft, and we drove it out to this place called Lacamas Lake that's here in Vancouver, um
Hmm.
or I guess it's like a town over in Camas, I think. But anyway, it's Washington. It's here in Washington. It's like 40 minutes from where I live. I think maybe even less, like maybe. Anyway, it's out there. And it's just a fun place. Like, it's awesome. So I'm out on this in this little raft rowing along, and I see just underneath the water this huge like serpentine creature go by. like just under the water to the point where you
Mm.
could see water like ripple around it. So it's like almost like it's coming up out of the water, but it didn't come up out of the water. Water just kind of came around it. And me being me, I was like, that's so awesome. I just saw I didn't really have any frame of reference for what I was seeing except the Loch Ness monster. So I said I just saw the Loch Ness monster, which was which was probably a mistake because obviously nobody's going to take you seriously
Sure.
when you're saying that. But I said that to my parents and um basically my mom was like, "Ah, Kevin, why do you do this stuff? Like, why can't you just..." And so she got annoyed with me, and I wanted to go back out on the water, so that I could see the monster again. Uh,
Dude, I get
and
out of there.
right, exactly. Um, Zero survival instincts on 10-year-old me, but I'm like, oh, I want to get back out there. And my dad was tired. He's like, I want to go home. And my mom was annoyed because I'm saying that I'm seeing the sea serpent in the lake. And so we ended up leaving. And I always remembered that day. And I'm like, man, it just, it honestly irked me a little bit that like nobody believed me, man. This sucks. Um, but
What was
so
there native legends or anything about the
yeah,
lake?
so
Okay.
years later, like probably 15 years later, by this point I'm a member of the Orthodox Church, and just on a whim, I was like, man, I wonder if anybody else has seen what I saw that day. So I looked up Lacamas Lake and no, actually, okay, so what started me thinking about this is that I was watching a documentary show and they were talking about how they went to a lake in Washington. And I'm like, hey, that's where I live, Washington. They're like, we went to a lake in Washington where there's this native legend, and it looked on the show like Lacamas Lake, but they weren't saying Lacamas Lake. So I thought,
Hmm.
I wonder if other people have seen this. So I looked it up. There's a Native American legend of a sea serpent or a lake serpent that lives in Lacamas Lake and like emerges up out of the water. And I think in the native
Mm.
legend, it would talk to people actually. It's like
Oh, geez, a
it would
giant talking serpent. No,
but it
this
would
is bad.
also eat people. And there have been people. So there was a guy who there was a white guy, a settler guy in the 1800s who was trying to cross Lacamas Lake with a horse, and he said that this giant serpent came up out of the water, ate his horse, and went back down into the water.
And didn't take
Um,
him.
didn't
Wow.
take him. It just kind of glared at him for a second and then went back into the water. There was another
Mm.
story where there's another story where some teenagers were, snogging out there, and when they were out there, when they snuck out of the house or whatever, their parents didn't know where they were, so they're out there smooching, and then all of a sudden they start hearing this like noise, and they're like, what? So the young boy steps out of the car and he's like, is somebody out here? And then he looks towards the lake, and when he looks towards the lake, there's this big serpent just like glaring at
Oh my
into their
gosh.
car, just like glaring at them with malice. So he of course books it back into the car and they drive off. But yeah, so this has actually been seen by like hundreds of, maybe even thousands of people throughout the years. And still to this day, not a year goes by that there isn't at least one person who sees or full on encounters this creature. But of course, it's considered a myth because, um, like, I guess the government has even tried to find this creature. So they've like dredged the lake. They've done radar into the
Sure
lake.
they have.
Right. And it's just like
Sure they
they're just like,
have.
oh yeah, there's nothing in there. There's nothing in there. But here's the
Oh, just like they
thing.
didn't put fluoride in our water, right?
Right, just like they didn't. but here's the thing too is what if, I mean, we're talking about spirit beings, right? What if it's a
Right.
spirit being? What if it's some kind of, what if it's a monster? What if it's some kind of like fallen
Yeah.
seraph or
It
something
could
like
take
that that
physical
lives,
form when it wants to and then not.
right,
You
takes
know,
a
you
form so
won't
that it
find it
can
if that's the
frighten
case.
us. Or
Yeah.
I think it could legitimately be some kind of like, I mean, whatever Nessie is, some kind of like lake
Plesiosaur or something
cryptid.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it could legitimately be that. But I also, I mean, the fact that I could see it under the water, but it wasn't
Mhm.
like attacking anybody. I mean, wouldn't an animal, like there was a bunch of people on the lake that day. I feel like just an
Yeah.
animal would probably,
Be like
um,
lunch,
yeah,
right?
exactly. I feel like
A
just
lot
an
of pickings
animal would be
today.
like, hey, check it out. There's a bunch of stupid people swimming around in my lake. I'm gonna eat one. Um,
Yeah.
so unless it was full, but
Yeah, it could be that too. Or it's like
but
a
I
blue
mean,
whale, it's a massive animal, but it eats plankton,
right.
It's like,
That could be, but it
who
ate a
knows?
horse, right? Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
maybe that's it. It doesn't eat us because we're too small. Like orcas don't
It,
eat us because we're too skinny.
it could be. Yeah. Yeah. Could be. That's
Because I
cool.
guess that's why orcas don't eat us. Orcas 100% could, and there's
I,
nothing
I
really
think they,
stopping them.
well, there has been a couple of people at SeaWorld that were attacked
Yeah,
by orcas. So I wouldn't put it past them to try to eat people. I just don't think people are normally on their menu. So
right.
like, but from what I understand, like I don't know if you've ever seen this horror movie. It's a horror movie called Orca. You ever seen it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, remember the orca is out for revenge for that,
Yeah,
that whaler who killed its mate and its unborn baby. That's a
it's,
terrifying movie.
it is. It is a
Yeah, the
terrifying movie.
music and the very disturbing too, like when the female orca is killed, the
Yeah.
sounds that orcas make when they die. I was like, I saw that when I was like 8 years old. Dude, I was like, when I watched it,
It messed you
I
up
was
for
like
life.
this. Like what just happened here?
Right?
And yeah,
Yeah,
and of
movies
course I
like that'll
rooted for
mess
the
you up for
whale the
life.
whole time, I was like, this guy gets everything he deserves,
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
sometimes I enjoy horror movies where it's like the monster actually is attacking somebody who has done evil. So it's like, ha, you got
Spirit
eat
of
that.
vengeance, yeah. Which they hint that orcas have, like the Native American guy hints that orcas have some sort of spiritual awareness. So
Hmm.
yeah, so
They might. I don't know, man. Orcas freak me out. I'm not.
yeah,
I
they're a big
can-
giant dolphin that hunts elephant seals and walrus. I
right.
mean, and other whales. Yeah, they're vicious. They're called killer whales for a reason. But
Right.
yeah,
They're like
exactly.
frightening as heck, man.
Yeah,
And then they're like they had their facial pattern makes it look like their eye is over here, but it's actually
but they
like
got
way
beady,
over
tiny
here.
little eyes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's just like
yeah,
what the heck, man? That's talk about a
yeah.
monster.
For real,
Freaking
for real.
orcas, man. But yeah, so
Yeah,
I basically I believe that I full disclosure, and all the atheists are going to make fun of me in the comments, but I believe that I basically saw a dragon. That
yeah. I
that's what I
mean,
think I saw
busy
that day.
believing the world came from nothing, so I really don't care. So
Right, exactly.
it's like
Y'all can make fun of me.
not to plug this channel, I won't name it, but there's a video of this person who's an atheist who says to a Christian that I don't think Jesus would deny homosexuals getting married or having equal rights or blah or adoption or whatever.
Right.
And the guy's like, hold on. He's like, do you believe Jesus is God? And the guy's like, no. He's like, well, if you don't believe in Jesus, I don't care. I don't care. Well, if you don't believe he's divine, then I don't care. I don't care. Until you believe he is God, then we have nothing to discuss because it's like, because he's getting at, until you actually consent that
Right.
Jesus is divine, there's no point in us arguing about whether
Exactly.
homosexuality is good or gay rights or anything like that. He's like, until we have a common ground on this point, there's no sense in arguing this. It's like, I
Exactly.
don't care what your opinion is of Jesus when you're an atheist. I really
Right.
don't, or
Exactly.
most of anything moral or ethical. Until we have, a common understanding that Jesus is God and, of course, part of the Trinity.
Right.
then we have no reason to discuss what Jesus would have thought of homosexuality.
Exactly. Like,
We know what he thought.
okay.
He was a practicing first century Jew. We know what he thought. But
Right.
it's like, but it's like, I really don't care what your opinions are in that matter. I really
Right.
don't. So I'm
Okay.
like, oh, you think I'm crazy because I believe in angels, demons, and fae and Jen and things like that. Okay, that's fine. But you don't believe Jesus is God and we came from nothing. So what do I care?
Right,
You know?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
I saw a thing where this guy was talking about, it was actually a guy arguing with a Buddhist, and he keeps bringing up these statements that are attributed to the Buddha that most Buddhists don't really practice. And the Buddhist guy wasn't really calling him on it, but I was sitting there thinking like, okay, but why are you're not a Buddhist, so why do you
Why do you
even
care what the
care?
Buddha thinks?
Right. Why do you
You know?
care? Like,
Yeah.
so in the same way, it's like, yeah, some atheist saying, "Oh, you're dumb because you think you saw a dragon." Okay, well, you think the Earth came from nothing, so I don't
Yep.
really care. Or the
Yep.
universe,
Atheism
actually, not
allows
even the
for
Earth, the universe.
yeah. Atheism allows for one miracle that
That's right.
nothing that everything came from nothing. You know,
Exactly.
Stephen Meyer plug him there. So
That's right. The one miracle they allow.
exactly.
All right, folks. Well, as much as I'm having fun, I know that probably this video is already like
We're at two
close to,
hours,
yeah,
man.
we're at 2 hours, so we better close up. But I did want to close off on that kind of fun note of like, we're talking about
This is dark
monsters,
stuff, man.
so we'll
Yeah.
end on a fun note. But yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I know that I haven't been as consistent about uploading recently, but do subscribe and like this video, share it with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed. And make sure that you buy our book when it comes out, our book Heretic, which is the first book in the Born of Blood series. God bless. Have a wonderful day.